Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Governance for Schools podcast, the best place to learn about a wide range of issues affecting today's governance landscape. My name's Joyce, Partnerships Manager within the team, and I'm delighted to be one of your hosts today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Alice.
Hello, I'm Alice. I'm also a partnership manager at Governance for Schools, and I'm really excited to be part of this episode. I think one that kind of resonates quite strongly with me. So if you don't know who Governors for Schools are, we are a national educational charity that finds, places and supports skilled volunteers, school governors and academy trustees on school and academy boards.
This podcast is geared towards an introduction to school governance for SCND, which stands for Special Educational Needs and Disability, and safeguarding professionals, as we know that there is a real need for them across school boards and a value they can bring to the table. Alice and I are not experts in these areas, so we've invited two guest speakers, Matt and Louise, who are school governors themselves, to share their experiences and insights. They will definitely do a much better job than me of introducing themselves. So I'll hand over to them.
Okay, my name's Matt Trevor. I'm currently a deputy head teacher at a primary school in the city of Birmingham. And then as well as that, I'm a safeguarding governor for a secondary school within the city of Birmingham as well. So yeah, pleased to meet you all and looking forward to the chat we're going to have today.
My name's Louise. I am also a safeguarding governor. I'm also an SEND governor at a primary school up in Merseyside. And I'm also delighted to be here today. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you both for joining us today. We are so looking forward to understanding more about how SEND and safeguarding skills are so vital to the governing boards. And as host today, we'll be letting you know more about how the work that we do at Governors for Schools and how you can get involved in volunteering as a school governor.
Okay, so obviously, according to what we know and government data, there are over 1.6 million young people and pupils in England who currently have SEND or special educational needs and disabilities, and that sort of number of young people and pupils needing support we know is ever increasing. Matt and Louise, you both come from professionally different backgrounds, different areas. I think it would be really interesting to get an understanding of what the lay of the land is with regards to SEND and safeguarding in your schools right now, and kind of just open that up, but also it'd be interesting to see the differences of what you bring and you take from your own professional backgrounds. Obviously, Matt is an educationalist, so his work is deep-rooted within education and always has been. Louise works for DEFRA, so the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, so has a completely different sort of take on things and perspectives, but obviously you're both serving within kind of like those similar areas within a school governing board. So Louise, do you want to go first?
Okay, so the school where I am governor is a single form entry primary school in a fairly rural part of a suburban area in Merseyside. So as a result of that, I think we've got really quite high numbers of SEND children in our school, given kind of the catchment and the location of the school, and that kind of brings about a lot of challenges at the moment because the school doesn't get a huge amount of pupil premium funding or funding for that, but actually, we've got quite a high number of pupils that do have additional needs and are needing that support, which obviously comes at a cost. We've got a fantastic Senko in post who's doing wonderful things and with support of lots of staff throughout the school, but it is a real challenge, and increasingly I think each year the challenges seem to be getting greater. I think obviously with getting children diagnosed, there's obviously a huge reliance on external agencies who are also stretched and also under not wanting to get any in political or anything, but the stretched services, aren't they? So I think it is a very challenging role. The school that I'm in, the Senko is also a full-time class teacher and also sits on the SLT and is also a course coordinator as well. So, it's the typical thing that comes with single form entry schools, that she's got an awful lot on her plate, but is doing the very best she can for the children who are, like I say, each year, increasing amount of EHCPs coming through the school and children who are waiting for, in our area, we're waiting about 2 years from kind of referral to diagnosis for, any number of conditions that might need that EHCP. So that's a bit of a picture of our current status for SEND. Safeguarding isn't as, I mean, obviously it's a huge priority in the school and it is really, a big focus of everything that the school does about keeping children safe. But we don't have a huge amount of safeguarding issues within our school. So
that's fab. That's really nice, giving us a really good understanding of kind of what perspective you're coming at this from. Matt, are you able to kind of give us a similar sort of understanding of what
it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It was really interesting, actually. Sorry to interrupt there to listen to Louise, because the school that I work at, that I'm in the SLT of, is very similar in many ways by the sound of it, in terms of a smaller one form entry school. And I think when it comes to SEND, those smaller one form entry environments are very popular for certain families with children who might have specific needs that they want to make sure are met. And over the last few years, we've also seen a big upward trend in the number of children who are eligible and who meet that criteria. And just to reiterate, the timescales involved, are a long time. You are talking at a couple of years, and it takes a long time for those diagnoses to kind of get through. I think another thing to kind of think about as well is, when you think of SEND, it's not always sort of the cognitive aspect. You've got the emotional aspects as well, and that's been a huge growth area, I think, in our school. So you could look at performance data for attainment and progress, and a large chunk of the SEND population are performing very well. It's not cognitive. It's not linked with what they do and don't know in its purest form. It's additional, sometimes more complex needs that need to be met by the school. And it's with the funding issues and we lean so heavily, schools, on external agencies. It's difficult. It is really difficult to help those families. In terms of my governance, from a governance perspective, and the school that I've been a school governor at for almost 4 years now, 3.5 years, something like that. At one point, I was safeguarding and SEND link governor for the school. It was only more recently that it was decided that both roles are actually so big, they should be done by two separate people. My direct SEND experience is relatively limited, I suppose. We work, as Louise said, very closely, obviously, with the SENCO at the school. And the role of a SENCO is so pivotal and it's so difficult because you have to wear so many hats. You're not, just the SENCO in school. Louise mentioned, a full-time teaching position on top of that. You wonder how they can get everything done, because there is so much to be done. So, I know from my limited exposure at secondary level at talking to the SENCO there, they're very much reiterating what we're talking about now, really, which is the fact that they're trying to do the very best that they can for, the pupils under their care, but in incredibly challenging circumstances.
Yeah, that sounds really tough and really challenging. And whether it is from a SENCO's perspective or from a school governor perspective, there's so much work, so much things that you guys need to discuss and go through. And I think it's really interesting that Matt and Louise, you both have taken on safeguarding and SEND link governor roles at the same time at some point in your school governance journey. Can you explain a little bit more to our audience who might not understand what a link governor is, and taking on both roles? How have you found these two roles? How did you juggle two huge responsibilities at the same time?
Okay, so a link governor is, so obviously as a governing body, you sit as a board and you attend meetings throughout the course of the year and you get presented with lots of information. A link governor then takes that a step further and actually goes into the school and will arrange and have a specific contact within the school for the responsibility that you're looking at or linking in with. And that actually is one of my favourite parts of governance, to be fair, is actually getting into the school and seeing what we hear about in action and getting the opportunity to have a look around and ask questions. So the link governor role for me for the SEND and for safeguarding is with two separate people in the school. I go in once a term at a time that's convenient to them. I prompt it, but let them drive it, because they're obviously incredibly busy people working in, challenging environment. In terms of how I manage it, really, my job's easy, isn't it? I'm going in, once every term. I'm going in. I created for our school a visit report pro forma. So in terms of not just going in and kind of sitting passively and just getting the information, I wanted it to be of benefit and something we could actively feed back to the rest of governors. So it's just so that everybody who goes in now just completes this, and it's got some fairly loose prompts on it about what was the purpose of the visit, what did you learn, is there anything that the governing board need to consider for future decisions, and how have you seen the school's vision, values and ethos in action during your visit. And it's hopefully to provide something really positive back to the governing body, but also flag areas for concern. So that's so I obviously go in. I'll normally go in for anywhere between an hour and 2 hours, and then complete the report. I'll always send the report to the person I've met first, in case because obviously not working in the sector, I don't want to misconstrue anything they say. I don't want to put anything that's maybe been said to me in confidence down that was just said conversationally. So they get to proofread it, and then once they're happy, it goes to the head and to the rest of the governors as well. So that hopefully through each link governor, the whole board gets a taste of what's going on within sort of daily life in the school, far more than sitting there and, ratifying policies and, listening to the head teacher give their report as well.
Yeah, I'd like to just extend on really what Louise said, because, it's very similar. It's interesting, I suppose, to look at it from a secondary perspective, because, like I say, I've had 12 years experience at governance at primary level. And then it was, like I say, almost 3.5, 4 years ago that I then decided to kind of look at governance at secondary school level. A lot of things obviously are very similar indeed, to be perfectly honest. So like Louise said, it's the termly visits, go and speak to the lead DSL, the designated safeguarding lead. Just, I think at the moment as well, there's a big push just to make sure they're okay, because they're under incredible stress, and some of the issues that have to be looked at and the support that has to be given to families can take its emotional toll on professionals, even those that have been in there for a long, long time and would be deemed to be very resilient people. But the well-being of the pupils as well as staff is incredibly important at the moment. We've had audits and things like that the secondary school that I'm involved with that have had. So it's quite good to be involved in those audits from a safeguarding perspective, because they do hold the school to account, and they do want to speak to school governors as well as those employed by the school, and especially the school still in the Ofsted window at the moment. So obviously with that looming, it does fill you with a little bit of confidence that the school's been kind of doing its due diligence annually to make sure that they're doing things that they should with regard to safeguarding. Those monthly visits also involve looking at the single central record. So that's obviously the school has a single central record with details on, and part of the safeguarding link governor's role is to obviously look at the single central record, cross-reference that with personnel files, just to make sure that everyone's compliant. Like I say, make sure that those people that are coming into school, whether it's a sports coach, whether it's music tuition, or in whatever capacity people have got direct contact with children, obviously we need to make sure that there's robust actions in place to make sure that things are safe. So there is an awful lot to do. As Louise said, you're feeding back to the full governing board. Safeguarding is kind of like the backbone of how schools operate. So, it's always on the agenda, but you do have those termly reports that the safeguarding link governor will write. And then obviously then, as Louise mentioned, it gets checked, it gets ratified before being presented to the governing board. And that will always be something that people will have plenty of questions about, because if there's anything that you're going to kind of hold scrutiny, it's going to be the safeguarding aspect before you even touch anything curriculum based. Yeah, it is a big role. It's an enjoyable one, but it's far more than, saying that you've read the latest version of Keeping Children Safe in Education, which to many people, they think that's really where it kind of stops. It's couldn't be anywhere nearer from the truth.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Matt and Louise. And it's so true that what you guys are doing at Link Governors in Safeguarding and SCND are huge responsibilities. And I think what you've shared justifies why we need to do this podcast, which is to recruit people like yourself, passionate, experienced, to be on a school governing board to help people and the school in terms of SEND and also safeguarding. And I think it is also important to mention the inextricable link and overlap that SCND and safeguarding have within the education sector. Some of our listeners may work in care with children or adults with SCND and will definitely know a lot about the added vulnerability of these people and children. And in this podcast, we'll be talking about SCND and safeguarding as two separate skills and areas of expertise, but know that in many circumstances, the overlap is there. Both are incredibly valuable skills to bring to the table as a school governor.
Yeah, and I think as well the environment, safeguarding and SEND also lends themselves to environments that are touched by lots of people day to day, both in their personal and professional roles. So we know that the skills are out there. The skills are definitely out there. And I think, Louise, what you touched on with regards to, your opportunity to be doing the link governor role it's obviously a huge responsibility and it's a lot of work, but also it gives you the opportunity to go and actually get into the school and really see what's happening on the ground with the pupils, with the staff in the schools day in, day out. And it's a great perspective to then bring back to that governing board table. So it doesn't feel kind of disjointed and like from this more strategic kind of level where you're sitting around a table looking at data and policies and what have you. It's lovely to be able to bring that in on a more kind of like personable and level day to day within the school. Joyce, I'm gonna hand over to you.
Cool. I feel like we've laid a pretty good foundation for safeguarding and also SEND. But we'll love to know more about you and Louise, to hear more about your governor journey. So what made you interested in becoming a school governor in the very first instance?
So for me, I started as a parent governor. So when I've got two daughters, my eldest was in F2. I was working part-time at the time, and used to go in and read with F2 1 hour a week, just to have a little nosy as to what was going on, if I'm perfectly honest with it, just to see what was going on in the classroom and see how my daughter was settling. But obviously then you get involved, don't you? And you see kind of how the school runs, and you get to know some of the teachers, and got speaking to the school business manager, and there was a parent governor vacancy at the time, and she asked me if I'd be interested. And that's how I eventually started getting involved. Not working in that sector at all, as I've said. It was a huge challenge, to be fair. And I spent the first year, we had at the time an incredibly experienced long-term governing body with we're a small governing body. A couple of the governors at the time had been in there since the late 1980s. So massive, massive experience. And I was new, and I didn't know any of the acronyms. Sorry, it was completely alien. And I spent the first probably 6-8 months thinking, have I done the right thing here? I'm really, really not sure whether this is for me. Then COVID happened, and governance, well, I don't know whether this is the same in your experience, Matt, but governance just seemed to get shelved, certainly for those first few months. I think the schools were just reeling and trying to support the pupils as best they could, support the staff. Everyone was very worried for all manner of reasons for that spring of 2020, weren't they? But our head teacher at the time, I think, had a bit of a taste of finishing work at a reasonable time, and decided that she wanted to step aside once life got a bit back to normal in September 2020 and schools reopened again. So this coincided with me starting to think about stepping aside, because I just thought, I've done a year in this, I'm not sure this is the right role for me. Everybody was really friendly and helpful, but I didn't see what I was bringing to it at all. And then she announced that she was stepping aside, and we were going to start the campaign for a new head teacher. And they were asking if anybody had the local authority safer recruitment training. And I was like, oh, I've done that professionally. And, I can help here. And then from there on, I was kind of hooked in more and more, because I'd done that qualification or that training course. And it was kind of much more in my sphere of work in recruitment and HR. And then obviously, by the time you get to the end of a lengthy recruitment process for a head teacher, you're invested then. You want to see how they do, how they perform, and the rest is history, really. I think I just thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I need to learn. I need to put myself on courses. I need to kind of get in as much as I can. Luckily, our new head was really amenable to that. And yeah, it's just been that's kind of my journey. And then as obviously the more I learn, the more I've picked up, the more link roles have gotten, the more kind of I've sort of moved through. As people have moved off the governing board, I've then stepped up into other roles. So that's how I got to where I am now.
It's a really lovely journey to kind of start really just grassroots. You wanted to go and see your daughter in school, and then here you are now. Great, love it, absolutely love it. Matt, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I joined the school's governing board where I still work now, because I've been at the school from an NQT and just worked my way up really into the leadership team. So I think it was in my second year of teaching when I was on a residential, the governors were there, and I think they twisted my arm to say, you should join the governing body, you'll really enjoy it. And they were very right, to be honest, because I have really enjoyed it. And the 12 years, the 3 terms flew by. I think at that point I was on, obviously everyone's part of the full governing board, and I was also on the buildings and finance, which was quite nice. I didn't want to be on the curriculum side of it, because I felt, that was your bread and butter kind of Monday to Friday. So I really enjoyed the buildings and finance and kind of seeing an aspect that I wouldn't have really touched upon if I hadn't been a school governor. And then after, when it got to those 12 years, and I could have started my fourth term, it's interesting really, because I mean, Louise mentioned about this, that there's a lot of experienced governors on a lot of governing boards, and that has many benefits, but obviously there's also a few negative things that can creep in. Not that I experienced personally, but there was a big movement, I think, at national level almost, to try and make sure that, you've got fresh ideas, fresh people in, but, the only issue with that is they don't have the expertise. And the other issue is the fact that this is a volunteering position, and there's not a wealth of people at, particularly at certain schools, that might be willing to obviously step up and have a go. And thirdly, the accountability aspect, which seems to go up and up and up and up and up. So it takes a certain type of person to put themselves forward for all of that, most definitely. And obviously there's a lot at stake, and we've already touched upon a lot of that in this podcast so far. At the end of that 12th year, there was a lot of, like I said, there was a lot of colleagues that were interested in doing the same thing and joining the governing board. So there was part of me that thought, well, in a way, it's a bit selfish of me just to crack on with it because, I enjoy it and I'm used to it and I've got the experience. So I decided at that point to look at becoming a school governor elsewhere. Initially, I was thinking about going to another primary school, but I'm really pleased that I actually ended up going to a secondary school, and it's almost like a very big secondary school. It's part of a kind of almost like a MAT structure there. So very much different to the maintained school that I work at the moment, which isn't part of an academy. So the two help me an awful lot. As we've already spoken about, safeguarding is such a big driver of my professional career and my professional job, that having that safeguarding link governor with my other school and the opportunities that gives me really does help kind of solidify my role as one of the deputy DSLs, for example, at the primary school that I work at. When was it? Tail end of last week, we have safeguarding or regional safeguarding governor meetings. So within that kind of MAT structure, you've got all the safeguarding leads that can meet together and they can go through contextual safeguarding across the city of Birmingham. It's also just an opportunity, I suppose, for safeguarding link governors just to have a chat and, reassure each other, because sometimes it could be a little bit stressful and people don't always understand what the job description is, for want of a better phrase, because it's such a big thing. So yeah, that's how it's kind of evolved from my perspective, having sort of 12 years where it was directly aligned with my professional career, and then just like a really great opportunity to actually branch a little bit further, and especially at a different key stage or key stages as well, to give me a kind of a much more holistic approach to how things operate in schools.
That's great. And I guess what you both touched on, what I'm kind of getting from both of you there, is it's afforded you lots of opportunities along the way to kind of grow and develop and maybe explore areas that you didn't necessarily think that you would kind of dive into when you first started out thinking about being a governor. And you're both still doing it and doing so much great work, which is fab to hear. I think I know COVID has been brought up, and it's such a massive thing, and it has had a huge impact, and obviously will continue to have a massive impact within education. Do you have any particular moments on the governing board that have been pivotal to the direction of the school or the progress and attainment of pupils? You could talk about COVID or any other kind of experiences or moments that have cropped up that are really kind of key for you in both of your time sort of on the school governing board. Any jumping out? Shall I go to Matt first on this one, just to keep it mixed up?
It's a really difficult question, and really difficult for me to differentiate between my role as a school governor and from being a school leader, because to be honest with you, when you ask that question, it's really the more kind of operational side of things, like as in how on earth are we going to work out who, is eligible for being a key worker and whose children can come into school and all those kind of things. Now, that did fall on the plate of the governing boards across the nation, really, at such short notice, I suppose. But yeah, it's fundamentally the fact that obviously children were in school. Now, my role as a school governor at secondary level kind of started really just after it had happened. We're in the COVID times, but we were kind of dealing with it, I suppose. But I know conversations that we had at those initial times was the fact that if you haven't got when those pupils aren't at school, whether they're deemed as being more vulnerable or not, straight away you've got safeguarding questions that obviously come up. And, the amount of days and time and hours that were spent from a deputy head teacher's perspective at this point, phoning everyone, making sure everyone's all right. And really, it was the parents and carers that wanted more of a conversation, to be honest, than the actual children, because, people were lonely back then. They wanted someone to speak to, they wanted reassurance and everything else. I mean, some of the data that I've managed to find in terms of, the number of children who have been absent from school, especially when you think of in the post-COVID times, 125,000 in autumn 2022 was severely absent, which meant that they were in school less than 50% of the time. Now, that alone is an alarmingly high number of children. Now, obviously, when we were dealing with the immediate aftermath of COVID and dealing with COVID, you had 95% of schools across the nation who were in school. So that, for me, from a safeguarding perspective, was the biggest hurdle to combat. Is you had to find out and make sure that, and have reassurances that those children were safe, because if you can't see them, you can't tell if they're safe, and you can't presume. We know that you only have to read the news to find that out. So yeah, from my perspective, and it's kind of linked in, like, I know I've talked about the response from an employee's perspective, from a school leader's perspective, but it definitely has a direct correlation with that of from a governance perspective, and particularly from a safeguarding governance perspective, because no one had trained for this. No one could have ever believed that what was happening. And to have such a high proportion of children nationally who weren't in school and therefore weren't potentially safe is quite an overwhelming thing to think about. And I know, from the perspective of the school that I currently work at, the school that I'm a governor of, and like I say, I was kind of like put into position after COVID started, but very much when remote learning was in place and everything else, it's making sure that that people are safe. So that would be the overarching kind of memory from that period of time from my perspective.
That's great. It's really interesting. Like, I imagine it's just fundamentally changed the way that you work on an individual level as a governor, but also perhaps as a whole governing board together in terms of focus since COVID happened.
Yeah. I know, just to interject, but I know obviously like we're running this podcast now, kind of like using technology, and I know governing boards prior to COVID, a large percentage of governing bodies would have met in person, and there's a lot of benefits to meeting in person, but obviously now, especially with some of the subcommittees, and we've mentioned about like link visits and all the rest of it, which is so important, whether they're subject link visits or safeguarding send and all the rest of it. I know a lot of governing bodies still have those meetings in person, but then some of the other meetings, whether it be the odd full governing body meeting or, like I mentioned, buildings and finance or curriculum, to kind of ease the workload a little bit and just to make it more accessible, they get on a Teams call or a Zoom call. So these are things that I think have been fast tracked, not just in education, but across all aspects of life, but that has helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Can definitely see that.
I don't know whether you found this in your school, Matt, but I know, talking to the Senko in the school where I'm a governor, I think the past few years of children coming through into F2, as I think she's found it really hard to start to sort of identify any children who may have additional SEND needs, because they come, especially last year, I think we're coming in with a lack of social skills, because they were the year that didn't go to baby groups, if you like, when they were at that crucial social age. So they weren't very good at kind of sharing or interacting with others through no fault of their own, just because they were probably one or two during that COVID year. But that's kind of had an impact even on the role of Senko, I suppose, because actually you've got an entirely different cohort coming in with a different skill set to maybe what's been in previous years, where you can start as an expert in this as opposed to identify traits of people that might need that early support. I don't know whether that's
it's a really interesting conversation, because I've thought about this. I mean, I've got a daughter of my own who was born in 2020, so she's just started school, she's just started reception, and obviously the reception class that have just come through in the school in which I work, you can look at that group and think, how effective are they going to be? And I wholeheartedly agree with what you've mentioned. I think a lot of the issues that those children that have faced, those COVID babies, have come through the parents and carers predicament of going through such an awful time. But then you can just justifiably so, and this is once again now looking at my role as a governor at a secondary school at the moment, that arguably those those pupils who were, of secondary school age, maybe, 11, 12, 13, 14, about to kind of make that change into adulthood, and having that kind of halted, arguably you could say that they've been affected more than children who, to be honest with you, are so young that they can't remember. My daughter doesn't know COVID or remember COVID because she was too young. However, there's plenty of households and situations where, with so much going on and the pressures going on, that through the prism of the parent and carer, a lot of ACEs, a lot of adverse childhood experiences could have been, thrust upon that child, and that then now is having repercussions now as they've entered their schooling. So, it's you could talk all day long, and I think, obviously everyone was affected, weren't they? To what degree is very subjective, because the conversations that we have at the governing boards meetings that I have at a secondary school are very much different to those that I had, within my working day at a primary school. But I very much agree with what you said, Louise, there, though, with the fact that there is a lot of need. There is a lot of need there now.
Can I just ask, Matt, just off the back of that, obviously when you're on the governing board at the secondary school and you're saying that obviously, the focus is different to where you work professionally. Yeah. How do you bring your learnings back to your professional role? And I guess, Louise, I can ask you the same question, like how's the kind of the overall role of a school governor? Obviously, Matt, you've kind of got the more intricate detail between primary and secondary within the education sector, but then Louise as well, for you, just what are you bringing back generally into your professional life? Matt, I'll go back to you.
Yeah, for me, it kind of works twofold. Like with my role with the governance role at a secondary school, it's really nice to know, because up until that year 6, when children do their SATs and then they start their transition work and taster days and all the rest of it, and then they kind of fly the nest and off they go into year 7. It's really nice to kind of see how that year 7 then turns into year 8 and then into key stages 3 and 4, and then obviously they then leave and join the working world and become incredibly successful people. That is really, really interesting to see that kind of because otherwise I was in year 6 as a year 6 teacher for the first sort of, 5-6 years of my teaching career. And I loved that age group. And I loved the fact you had those hurdles to get across and all the rest of it, get them ready and prepare them for the next phase of their life. Conversely, coming back the other way, where I find it helps me professionally, the role of the school governor, is the fact that particularly at secondary school, because I think of economies of scale and people, when reports are presented, whether it's an attendance report that's part of obviously the safeguarding remit, or ideas linked with how they can develop the curriculum, I take those back to primary and we have chats about those in SLT meetings and things of that nature, to a watered down degree due to just capacity, for want of a better phrase. And obviously primary and secondary are two completely different ecosystems, but what it offers me is I get loads of ideas that I can then take back. Some might be applicable, like directly applicable. Some might need a bit of a tinker around with to make them kind of relevant for the primary sector, but that's really helped me professionally. And like I say, it's also been nice to see through my role as a governor kind of what happens to those pupils when they leave the primary phase.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I can totally see it. What about you, Louise? Kind of bringing those skills back to what you do day to day in your role?
I think the role I do professionally is a very much an operational role of working like a resourcing environment, kind of bringing people in and, onboarding them and HR and what have you. I think where the school governor role really has benefited me is the strategic oversight. I think it encourages me to be a more strategic thinker, because obviously you put your governor hat on, your governance hat on, and you're looking at your strategic planning. You're keeping way out of the operational because that's not your remit at all. So I think then being able to kind of in the day job actually put that strategic hat on and think, well, okay, that's not my role here to be strategic, but I need to think ahead, and it just helps. I think it just helps give that. There's no kind of like direct examples, like obviously like Matt's got in terms of how it will actually impact his day job. But for me, it's certainly kind of just giving me that greater oversight and encouraging me to sort of think bigger, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally see that. Absolutely. Joyce, over to you.
Cool. I guess, there are a lot of benefits to being a school governor. I'm a school governor myself as well, and I've learned so much from being a school governor. So I really encourage people to be a school governor, and I believe you guys have the same thought too. As this podcast comes to an end, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to people who are considering to be a school governor?
Okay, if you're coming from outside of working in education and not having any knowledge, I would say if you do decide to become a governor, obviously you've got to be prepared for the amount of time I think it takes. And I think you get the most out of it when you put into it. So you're being prepared to undertake training, being prepared to kind of learn about the role that you're going to do. But also I'd say, and I say this to anybody who joins our governing body, is if the school is amenable, get in as much as you can. I think that would be the greatest bit of advice, to actually see what is going on day to day in the school and how the decisions you take impact that, and how the documents you look at are reflecting the real life, the actual, the children. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, isn't it? It's kind of getting those children the best educational start that they can have in a safe environment, and you're a part of that. So, but it's really important for you to actually, I think, get in and see that, and that will help shape you into the kind of governor that hopefully will be acting in the best interest of the children in the school.
That's helpful. What about you, Matt?
To be fair, yeah, I think Louise has hit the nail on the head there, because I think it is so important to be able to go in and visit schools and to see them in action, because you could be a governor for years and years and years sometimes and probably never set foot in the school when the pupils are there and the children are there, and not see all those policies in action, for want of a better phrase. I think that is so important, and I know it's a big driver for all schools to try and get their governors in more. That's where now there's much more of an emphasis on coming in to look at subjects, and for every subject to have a linked governor, so they can come in and so they can hold the teaching staff to account. But more importantly, from the governor's perspective, is to build that rapport with the staff, the children, and they're such an incredibly important stakeholder of a school. The chair of governors, as Louise has alluded to, are responsible for recruiting staff and head teachers, and there's no more important job than that, to make sure that you've got the right people working with the next generation of our workforce and our society, really. The other bit of key advice that I would talk about, and I know Louise has alluded to this as well, is just ask questions. When I think back to when I was a first school governor, and bearing in mind, I worked in a school at that point, Monday to Friday, but as you said, there's so many acronyms to learn. What's pecuniary interest? What does that mean? And, it was months until actually I started to join the dots a little bit and think, okay, right, I understand how that works. And even 12 years later, when I then went at secondary level, yes, the structure of a meeting was similar, but it was very much different. So it's still a learning curve. It's a constant learning curve. Always ask questions, always. And when I mean that, ask questions if you're unsure, but also always ask questions of the school, and don't be afraid to hold a school to account, because schools want their governors to ask questions. There is nothing worse than having a governing board that don't want to ask questions because they think it might be awkward and things of that nature. Obviously, it's all linked in with the ethos of the school and the way it's done, but it is incredibly important to ask questions for the collective benefit of the school. But yeah, go for it. It's such a rewarding position, I think, even from someone who's in education and been in education for a good while now. But I wouldn't volunteer my time, because we're all busy people, if I didn't think it was worth it.
Absolutely. Both of what you've said, both of you, is so valuable, and hopefully, SEND and safeguarding are vast topics, and we couldn't possibly kind of go into all the intricate details of what that looks like on a governing board, sort of within a short space of time. But hopefully we've given sort of listeners a little taste of any skills that they might have, contributing those skills, what that might look like, what kind of impact you can have, and what also the journey can look like. Louise and Matt, both really different journeys, and both really valuable ones. So yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. There is, as we have said, and we will continue to say, a continual need for governors. Vacancies are registered with us throughout the year, and being a school governor means that you're part of one of the largest groups of volunteers within the UK. I think that's something when governors go into the role, they're not necessarily aware of as well. And just to touch on, Matt, what you were saying previously about sort of doing the role and, you know, you being a governor on your school board, but actually being able to network with other governors in other schools and chat about the challenges that you're facing and things that you're putting in place there is also really, really important. And there are opportunities for that. So always keeping kind of aware and open eyes towards that. It's next over to you. So if there's anyone kind of listening who's thinking they'd like to pursue the school governor role, then what we would encourage you to do is to visit our website, and that's www.governorsforschools.org.uk, and there you can complete your online profile and highlight your skills and experience there. Also, there's an opportunity to put forward a personal statement that demonstrates your passion, commitment, and what have you to improving educational standards through the governance. It's then with this application that we take forward and we share with schools during the process of finding you a suitable school governor role.
And we also want you to feel confident in your governor role as quickly as possible. So we have a range of free e-learning modules on a number of topics. We also hold regular webinars so you can continue your learning and have the opportunity to ask our governance experts questions. And once placed at the school, you'll be given 12 months free access to online governor resource and knowledge bank from Governor Help Knowledge. So once you've submitted your application, it is definitely worth checking out all of that, as well as any other of our podcast episodes which might strike your fancy. Well, I guess that's a wrap, and I want to say a massive thank you to Louise and Matt for sharing their time, experiences, and advice, and also thank you everyone for listening. We will hopefully be back with another episode soon, so stay tuned!